all the resources in the world will not help you if you have not just sat down and also experimented. They're there to help you as you actually use the technology. So a lot of this stuff can be solved by somehow, and I realize it's hard, we're all super busy, carving out the time to just mess around with the tool. Like there's even one really simple example is there's been on recent calls with really, really smart leaders and executives. And like more than one of them have admitted to me like, man, yeah, I've just really been meaning to get around to building my own GPT. And I'm like, this takes 30 seconds. We could do it right now while we are answering this question on this podcast. So I think there's just sometimes people think the barrier is a lot higher than it actually is. They don't know what to focus on. And of course, it's all really overwhelming and we have limited time. So those are all very real barriers I sympathize with. But those are kind of some of the biggest ones I see right now.
You're listening to RevOps Champions, a podcast created for B2B leaders to help you align your people, streamline your processes, trust your data, and leverage technology in order to grow your business. Mike Kaput, welcome to RevOps Champions. It's good to have you on the show.
For sure. Thanks for having me.
So as an intro, tell us a little bit about Marketing AI Institute. I mean, I cannot believe how long it's been. You know, I keep thinking it's still like 3 or 4 years old, but it's been going for a lot longer.
It can feel like it.
Yes. Yeah, because of the sort of time warp that we've lived in for the last 5 years. So tell us about the Marketing AI Institute. And then, of course, SmarterX, which, of course, is another venture that was more recently started, which I'm also super excited about.
Sure thing. So Marketing AI Institute is a media, event, and education company. We started way back in around the end of 2016, believe it or not. Our founder and CEO, Paul Raitzer, that's when he launched the business. And we kind of started out as a way to tell the story of what we were seeing happening in AI. So Paul owned a marketing agency that I used to work for as well. So we're both marketers by trade. I helped Paul research the AI section in his second book that he was writing back in 2014, 2015. So through that kind of work, Paul became convinced AI was going to be kind of a very big deal for marketers. Through my research, I had kind of arrived at similar conclusions. So I kind of helped with the early content around the Institute while working at the agency. Fast forward several years, and that grew into kind of an industry-leading source of education. And then we put events and courses on top of all that. So really, at the end of the day, our entire mission is to help marketers and marketing leaders understand, pilot, and scale AI. We do that in a bunch of different ways through our annual conference, MACON, the Marketing AI Conference, which is happening in October of this year for the 5th annual conference. And we also have an AI Academy with a ton of great courses, an AI Mastery membership, which is an education membership for a year and help with ongoing education. So we do all these initiatives, the entire point of which is to foster AI literacy for marketers, because we think that's the most critical skill that they need to survive and thrive kind of moving forward in the age of AI. And what you referenced with SmarterX is actually, SmarterX is our parent company that was launched only a couple years ago by Paul, also owned by Paul, and he is the CEO. SmarterX was kind of an outgrowth of what we had done at the Institute. And SmarterX is at its core, it's an AI research and education firm. And the entire point of it is to create AI transformation in companies. So we educate and empower leaders to reimagine businesses, reinvent their industries, rethink what's possible. And the kind of relationship here is that if you think of kind of everything Marketing AI Institute has done and continues to do for AI literacy and marketing, SmarterX is about AI literacy for all. It's every industry, every function, every type of company. And through that company, we also do a number of events, education, and media as well. So that's kind of a newer, exciting journey that we're on as well.
Yeah, it is one that I'm following very closely and very excited about. And I think, one of the other things that I've actually, I was at the inaugural MACON event, back in 2019, I think it was, in Cleveland, which was eye-opening. And I still think about things that I learned back in 2019.
Right.
Because there was a group of, people who are still considered futurists at that event. So again, for anyone who hasn't been to MACON, check that out, MAICON. happening in October of 2025. But then the other thing, I think, marketing always seems to be where technology starts and leads. If you go back to, any sort of technological breakthrough, marketing is always the first area that's impacted. So it's not a surprise that the Marketing AI Institute was started focused on marketing, because obviously that's where you guys came from. That's the background that you had. But I've also seen this shift more recently, and including the name, the renaming of your show, which is now the AI show, which is another thing for our audience to check out. I mean, it's probably one of the easiest ways to sort of keep up with the groundbreaking stuff that you guys are talking about every week. And what you were talking about now with SmarterX, it's no longer just about how does marketing use AI, it's how do businesses cross-functionally use AI, because it is now so invasive, for the lack of a better word. I'm very happy about that progression, because of course we've also made that same transition over the last 7 years, where we were also very, very marketing focused. But then as HubSpot evolved as an ecosystem, as a platform into sales and service and beyond, we realized that that was really where the opportunity was. And it was beyond just marketing, the technology that essentially drives an entire business. Oh, I guess as a side note, I think it's worth mentioning, you guys were also recently chosen by HubSpot to be the trainers for HubSpot solution partners. So again, coming back to your point of like leading with AI literacy, which clearly is the most important first step right now for so many businesses struggling to figure out where to start. So I'm guessing that was another coup for you, where SmarterX and the Institute were essentially chosen by HubSpot to train any HubSpot partners who want to be more literate and lead in AI.
So we've had some conversations with HubSpot in a variety of contexts, and a lot of this is kind of more our CEO Paul's kind of a wheelhouse here. But we have had some conversations with them about doing things like that. And we've had a lot of companies approach us. It's been really striking, actually, since January, because January of this year is kind of where all this starts to really coalesce, because we released something through SmarterX called the AI Literacy Project. And this is both a project and you could kind of call it like a manifesto. And it's on smarterx.ai. Under education, you can see it really easily. But basically, the idea is, like Paul put into words, everything we were seeing in the market, everything that we were looking to do when it comes to accelerating AI literacy for all. Not only the need for it, but also from our company's perspective, what do the phases of that look like? So we launched this whole new, you could call it kind of a roadmap of where our AI Academy, our education offering, is going. And it's an existing education platform that has a ton of very happy learners. So we're kind of blowing the doors off and expanding that dramatically. And the moment we released that, we had really, really interesting conversations come into the pipeline from all these major companies saying, hey, we really need training across not just marketing, sales, service, HR, legal, whatever. We need this training for our teams, because what we're doing now is not working necessarily. It's moving too slow, or we don't know where to start. So that's been really, really exciting. And it just validates in a huge way. AI literacy isn't the only thing, but it is kind of the core starting point where I think a lot of companies underinvest or just kind of go wrong. And that's why you have a lot of these companies, unfortunately, and we've worked with plenty of them, that spend a large amount of money and time and energy providing their teams with really costly or complicated tools. And they expect, well, we just spent X amount on AI. Why isn't it working? And they didn't provide any of your average employees with any kind of understanding of what this actually is, what it can do, how they should be using it, and what the impact could be on their own role.
Yeah. Which again seems to be a continuation of the challenge that companies have, or organizations in general have, with the adoption of any technology, right? Whether it was prior to AI or now with AI, if you don't provide training, then there's not going to be adoption. Without adoption, you're not going to get the ROI of the original or intended investment or value. So yeah, again, what you guys are doing is incredible. And again, for anyone listening who hasn't yet figured out how to provide that sort of training, either for themselves or for their leadership or for their teams, I think all the resources that you've already mentioned around the Marketing AI Institute or SmarterX are a really good place to start. That's where I started myself, last year as that first became available. So thanks for all you do, Mike.
We try. We're glad people, it's resonating with people. It's been a long journey.
Right. So, Mike, you have a front row seat in this super exciting AI roller coaster. What are you currently most excited about?
Man, I feel like so much. But if I had to pick recently, what I'm most excited about is just the absolute treasure trove of advanced models that we now have. I mean, it seems like years ago that every new product release comes out, and then I look back and it's like weeks or maybe a month. But I would say the biggest, most recent exciting development has really just been how good these reasoning models are getting. So, we're able to get so much done and do so many cool things with your kind of advanced but non-reasoning models like a GPT 4.0, right? It's still really, really impressive and usable for so many great things. But then just like having access to something like OpenAI's O3 or Gemini 2.5 Pro, the amount of high-level strategic and creative work and brainstorming and execution we've been able to do in a short time with that level of intelligence has just blown me away. That's where you start to really see, beyond all the other cool stuff, the true promise of these tools, because you're reckoning with a tool that is essentially as smart as you in a lot of different domains, if not smarter. So I'm not saying these models can do everything, but if you are any type of marketer or business person doing any type of planning, strategizing, forecasting, the higher level, maybe executive stuff you're tasked with, and as a part of any quarter or year, I'd highly, highly recommend, if you can, trying out these tools for this higher value, higher order work, because it is stunning what they can do.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. But one of the challenges, of course, is, you just mentioned 3 incredible tools as starting points. And this comes up, at least on a weekly basis, often more frequently internally here at Dynamico, where everybody has kind of their favorite tool that they're using to be sort of their thinking partner. And I think one of the challenging things is so a bunch of us, we're starting to lean towards ChatGPT, 4.0, for example, even though there's a few, again, because of their roles, that they still prefer, Claude. But then yesterday when it came up, it was one of our engineers was saying, well, in fact, what the stuff that Gemini is doing right now is just off the charts.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the challenges is you want to commit to a tool, so that it doesn't become more complicated for you every day to switch. But what do you advise folks in that situation where they're comfortably using one and then they hear, and of course we're all impacted by shiny object syndrome, some of us more than others, that in fact we actually already have access to, all the Gemini tools. How do we know when to switch?
Oh my gosh. It's a good question. And I hope if you find the answer, let me know, because I struggle with this too. And it sounds simple, but what I keep coming back to is this is why it is so critical for you to be, as much as humanly possible, focusing on use cases and documenting your workflows for how you achieve those use cases with AI tools. Because thankfully, I've been okay at doing this in my own work. So anytime a new model drops, I can just jump into a documented workflow with different prompts that are written down, steps, like pretty straightforward documentation that I can pretty quickly say, okay, let me try out this new model with an existing task or workflow. So you kind of want that infrastructure in some way, even mine's just Google Docs. It's nothing crazy. You want that infrastructure in some way so you can easily and quickly test out new models, but also at a macro level, for your individual marketer, I would say, or business person, I would just make sure to get really good with using at least one of these tools or 2 of these tools for the right things, instead of getting distracted, though it's very easy and fun to get distracted by tools. At the business level, it's a little harder because you have to make commitments, right? You have to plan around technology. I don't have an easy or a great answer for that because it's really hard. But I would say that there's a lot of FOMO. It's easy to think like, oh my God, if I'm not using the latest, greatest tool, I'm out of luck. But there's also a really, really good chance, I would guess, that you're not getting as much out of the tool you're already using as you could. So there is a balance there that I think is important to consider.
Yeah. Okay. So we've talked a bit about the exciting things and the powerful things that we can do. And it's hard, even though you spend a lot more time thinking about this than most people do, it's hard to imagine how our lives are going to change over the next couple of years, right?
Yeah.
But let's flip to some of the sort of the challenge or the obstacles that you're seeing, whether it's firsthand or through all the training that you're providing. Like, what seem to be the sort of the biggest stumbling blocks for folks right now?
I'll try to kind of tackle this sequentially and see kind of where we get. But first off, we talked about this. Just basic AI literacy is a huge stumbling block. I obviously sound like a broken record on that, but truly, if your company is trying to do anything around upskilling with AI and your average person in any department has no conception of what AI is and what it can do for them, you have a problem. So you need to start with that. Even if it's in tandem with all the other work you're doing, great, but it has to be a piece of it. Beyond that, too, I'm actually kind of surprised, at least today, like how many companies don't take seriously just teaching people better prompting. Now, it's possible in the future, even relatively soon, we just won't need to be as good at prompting. And, you can get really far and just as far by just having conversations with these tools. You don't have to necessarily always have a great structured prompt, but even like in an hour, you could get a lot better at prompting if you're one of those, you're an average marketer who hasn't been following this stuff and you now need to get up to speed. I'd spend an hour learning a prompting framework and like figuring out maybe a GPT to help you write prompts or even just whatever you need to talk to the models about to get a good prompt. That'll take you a pretty long way, actually, I would say. So that can be a big stumbling block. I think also a huge stumbling block with any of this stuff. This is not a new problem. It's just accelerated with AI is like, again, the shiny object syndrome. It's people will always ask me, well, which tool is best for this thing? And I'm like, well, have you done that thing yet? And they'll be like, well, no, I'm waiting to get the best tool. It's like, no, like you're doing it backwards. Go do the use case with anything, even if it's bad, it's not a great output. Go do it first. And there's a lot of that, I think, at a macro level too with this stuff. It's really, I say this as someone who works on courses, podcasts, has co-authored a book, like all the resources in the world will not help you if you have not just sat down and also experimented. They're there to help you as you actually use the technology. So a lot of this stuff can be solved by somehow, and I realize it's hard, we're all super busy, carving out the time to just mess around with the tool. Like there's even one really simple example is there's been on recent calls with really, really smart leaders and executives. And like more than one of them have admitted to me like, man, yeah, I've just really been meaning to get around to building my own GPT. And I'm like, this takes 30 seconds. We could do it right now while we are answering this question on this podcast. So I think there's just sometimes people think the barrier is a lot higher than it actually is. They don't know what to focus on. And of course, it's all really overwhelming and we have limited time. So those are all very real barriers I sympathize with. But those are kind of some of the biggest ones I see right now.
Yeah. Which again, I guess it's always comes back to the same thing with anything that you've never done before. It's kind of like the analogy of how do you run a marathon? You take the first step,
Yep.
It's just whatever it's going to take that first step. And you did a post recently on LinkedIn where you were kind of addressing folks who, and hopefully there's not too many of them listening to this, but you were essentially saying like, if your company is not providing AI tools for you to do your work yet, then, just get a paid cheap tool, it's $20 a month and just start using it for your personal use. Like, how do you prepare meals and how do you, just things that you're doing personally that you need to get done and just saving you time at home. And again, that adds to your literacy. And then eventually when the company you're working at introduces it, you're going to be ahead of the folks who haven't done that, right?
100%. And I'm sure there's plenty of people listening that are not, like you said, in that scenario. But I think you'd also be, well, I was surprised at least by how many limitations companies are putting on how people can use the tools they also have. Like I've seen a lot of companies that have their own kind of custom versions of these tools that have way less functionality. And I get there's considerations. I don't know the ins and outs of each company, so I'm sure there's some good reasons for it. But if you have not even used at work basic things like file uploads, data analysis, image generation, reasoning models, GPTs, then yeah, I think you would be well benefited by working on that in your free time as much as possible, because it's going to be so critical for the next job you get, or then when you do get access to those things at work.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you address the question that some leaders who aren't moving as fast as you think they might, who are concerned about security, so data security, how do you sort of respond to that concern?
It's a huge barrier. That's probably the one big barrier I left out of your previous question, is there's very, very real, very, very hard to solve questions around data security. I mean, kind of the typical advice we give, because every company is they struggle with the same problems, but the ways they address them and the considerations they have are all so different. So it makes it very, very hard to give kind of one size fits all advice. But this is why we often say to people, as you are going down the journey of kind of AI transformation and AI literacy, as you're, say, forming AI councils or coming together to solve this stuff, this is not just an IT thing to solve. It's not just, oh, we're going to start with marketing and have them solve it. You almost certainly need to be talking to your legal and security people from day one. And I know a lot of people listening might not love that idea, because that can slow you down quite a bit, but it is absolutely imperative. You have to just involve these people, because they will get involved, like it or not. At some point, it is better to start off with their buy-in and relationships with them. I've worked with companies that have done a pretty decent job of this out of the gate, and it's made all the difference, because they actually have allies and champions within things like legal, IT, and procurement that help them actually navigate all the different scenarios that they have to navigate, because there are many.
Yeah. So I guess one of the things I think about is not every business attorney. So for example, let's just say a few thousand companies hear this message and they go, oh, well, we should just reach out to our business attorney. What percentage of those business attorneys are going to be up to speed on this, AI security question or data security question?
That's a huge challenge. You see it a lot, especially too around questions like IP as well, where people are worried about copyright and IP. It's a huge, huge concern. There's a lot of legal professionals that are starting to get up to speed on this. Lots of people that definitely in some of our stuff, some of our events, you can find, I'm sure, on our website, some names and some resources you can check out. But yeah, you have to wonder, like, how much of that market is truly up to speed on something that is so bleeding edge, like now, that basically nobody's fully up to speed. And even the ones that are often admit there's lots and lots of gray areas and question marks still. So big challenge. If you, I guess I would say, don't take this as any type of actual legal advice, but if you are talking to a lawyer that has no idea about this stuff, you probably need to find someone that does.
Yeah. And know that they might advise you to actually do less than what you should be doing.
Yes.
And that's where, again, leaders have to make a decision, a balanced decision on how do we push forward? Because if we don't push forward fast enough, we're going to get left behind. But find the balance of like, but let's make sure we don't have any security issues where if we expose customer data and we have an issue, that might be the end of the business,
Yeah. And this is also at a very basic level too, even before you get in all these weeds with it. I would encourage everyone listening, if you don't have any type of basic AI usage policy for your people, like say you are using tools even at a basic level right now, you absolutely need something like that, because especially as you are hiring new people, especially younger people who are going to be living in an AI first world as far back as high school and college, they're going to default to using these tools for everything. That's just going to be baked into their DNA. It's already it's starting to be baked into all of our DNA.
Yeah.
You need to be telling people how they can and can't use tools out of the gate from day one, because you're going to run into serious issues if you don't, because it's very easy for people to not know what the different licenses enable from a privacy perspective, it's very difficult. Sometimes people just have no idea. Oh, I didn't realize. I thought I was just sharing it with my chat GPT. It's like, well, no, it's on an OpenAI server as well. Lots and lots of really avoidable basic pitfalls that you can at least solve for with a really solid policy that's well communicated while you're untangling all the very hard legal and privacy questions.
Yeah, no, that's really good advice. And you mentioned that you have some resources on your websites that mention potential resources around legal and security.
So the one that I would direct people to would be the on-demand recording of our AI for Writers Summit. That's the most recent time we talked about this. If you go to marketingaiinstitute.com, go under events, you'll see this AI for Writers Summit event. You can get on-demand recordings. We had a whole session or two on AI for copyright and IP. And so those would also be people that their firms, while they're, IP attorneys, there's also people on panels at that event that do work like this as well from a legal perspective. So we don't have like a centralized like database or resource, but those would be the people I would start looking at.
Right. Is there an episode number for that one?
This is just a recording of a virtual event that we did.
Oh, okay.
And honestly, too, you can just go to the event page and look at the agenda as well and just get the names from there, too, if you want to start looking further into that world of AI plus legal.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Okay, I think that's really good. I think, I wanted to make sure we covered that. So as we sort of move our way back to the more fun stuff, and this might feel like a bit of a repetitive question, but with anything in life, right? You have those of us who see the glass half full and those who see the glass half empty. What is the big difference that you see between these two groups typically? I mean, do you have any more insights you can share on that?
That's a really good question. I think about it a lot. I don't know how many clear answers I have, but I think the differentiator is really, I find it very hard to see someone who has adequately used these tools versus just reading headlines. Like, use them for a wide variety of use cases. I'm not saying try ChatGPT once or like, oh, I tried to poorly prompt it to do some AI tool to do something and it failed. Go, if people have used it in their personal lives and professional lives extensively, I don't know many of them that are super pessimistic. I mean, very aware of, oh my gosh, there's ways this could all go very wrong. And we have to guard against that and work for that future not to come to pass. But it's very hard, I think, to use these tools adequately and not at least see the positive side too. So whether you're, whether you just say half full or even just like, I'm a pragmatist, there's good and bad. I don't even know if I can think of anyone that's like, oh, I've spent dozens of hours using AI and I find it completely worthless and 100% negative. So I think experimentation is probably the differentiator if I had to pick.
Yeah. And again, just playing with it or trying it, or,
exactly.
I often think about how capability is what drives confidence, right? The reason that people aren't confident about certain things is because they haven't yet built the capability around it. And that could be really basic, like the example of that you gave recently of, just use it to help you plan your menu for the week or whatever.
Yeah, and it's such a hard information environment to be into because there's so much hype and so many headlines around AI. And I'm not at all trying to diminish the negative sides because there's a lot of things that we need to figure out. We'll see if this ends up being net positive or net negative. But from a very practical perspective, it's very hard to make the argument there are not benefits to sometimes using these tools for some things.
Yeah, no, totally. So RevOps, there's an increasing amount of talk around. So a lot of what we do is considered RevOps, right? Because we're not just implementing and integrating the CRM and all the tools that our clients are using. We're also advising them on how to set things up so that they have alignment, not just in their tech stack, but in their data and their processes and their teams, which is all that enablement stuff that is often called RevOps. And there's an increasing amount of talk in AI RevOps or AI for RevOps. Do you have any perspective on that? Or, as you've sort of gone from working with primarily marketers, and that's obviously still where you have most of your experience, but as you've now started working with cross-functional teams in sales and service. And you mentioned, HR and beyond, just sort of literally giving leaders visibility into what they're trying to do. Any thoughts on AI to support RevOps?
Yeah, I would say I'm kind of reminded actually because it's so top of mind. We had this big virtual event yesterday, an AI for B2B Marketers Summit. And one of the sessions was by Katie Robert at trustinsights.ai. They do a ton of work with AI consulting and data consulting. And Katie's whole talk wasn't even about what should you do with AI. It's how do you get your data ready for AI? And it wasn't strictly just RevOps examples, but it really struck me as this very clear example of what I see often in these kind of areas is you get in all excited to use AI and to deploy AI, and you very quickly realize, oh my gosh, we have all the same issues and problems that RevOps needs to have solved or works on solving before AI was even a thing, right?
Absolutely.
So the fundamentals like data quality, cleanliness, silos, process documentation, all this stuff that ends up being a huge inhibitor to doing RevOps right, that's also just directly a huge inhibitor to doing AI right. So I actually think I'm sure AI is going to transform what becomes possible in RevOps. But my guess, at least for today, would be that really good RevOps pros, you're probably needed more than ever to untangle this stuff because it is going to be absolutely critical to do anything useful with AI.
Yeah, that's really good insight. And as we were sort of starting to unpack this last year, knowing that this was a train that was coming down the tracks pretty quick, was, where do we start in guiding our clients from an AI perspective? Exactly to what you just said, we realized there's actually very little difference in how we would advise them to adopt any technology.
Yeah, right.
So we sort of kept boiling it down to, well, what is the very first layer, sort of the foundation? And what we boiled it down to was it's AI readiness, right? So whether it's AI readiness or CRM readiness or growth readiness, whatever you want to, it all starts with readiness. And then we're like, okay, but what does readiness actually mean? And the very first thing that we realize is, well, readiness means if you have good, clean data, you're ready. If you don't, you're not.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really matter what the next step is until you've figured out how to have really good, clean data.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, a simple example is I mentioned that Paul, our founder and CEO, had a marketing agency. I used to work there. We were a big HubSpot shop. We still are. The companies today run on HubSpot. So super familiar with that, obviously. But we would go to clients all the time that, our whole thing was transforming your marketing strategy because with this newer thing at the time called inbound marketing and really doing these basically a digital transformation with these companies. And 90% of the time, the first, I don't even know how much time was just spent on you don't even use the technology you have. It's a mess. Your data's all over the place. We couldn't even get to the fun stuff until that stuff was solved. It was super valuable to solve it and a common challenge we were able to help with. But we did not get to always out of the gate do the exciting new technology, new approach stuff. So I think you're absolutely right on that.
Yeah. But looking back on that now, though, Mike, what do you think, whether it was a combination of you and your clients or even just the clients, what would you have advised them, knowing what you know now, what would you have advised them to do differently back then so that they were more ready?
Well, the way we approached it, and we were a pretty small shop, so we had kind of pretty core competencies we were focused on. We always approached it just level setting upfront with some type of, we used to call them marketing growth hackathons. We would do a session up front where basically we want to, in an afternoon or a day, actually define what you're trying to do and what the KPIs are associated with that. And then everything else flows from that. And that sounds pretty simple, but it was shocking how few people knew that before those sessions. And then once you have those things, you can then say, okay, it becomes a little easier to wrap our arms around this disaster of a CRM that you have here, because now we can chunk this off into different pieces that all align with the KPIs and the strategy and the goals that we actually bothered to get aligned on. And sometimes it was even as simple as getting all the people in one room who had different ideas of what those things were and didn't talk to each other otherwise.
Yeah. It's actually funny you mentioned that, because Paul actually was our guest facilitator, like, I don't know, if it was 2018, 2019. Yeah. He came out to Minneapolis and we had 150 folks and he essentially took them through a hackathon, and it was incredibly valuable for the folks doing it, because again, it just got them to focus on like what was important, what were the priorities, what were the next steps. And they were often we did it in such a way that there were ideally 2 to 3 people from each organization. So it wasn't just one person with one perspective trying to figure this out. They were doing it as a small group and then going back to their bigger groups. And I think we had really good feedback after that about the value that they got from that.
That's cool. I love that.
Yeah, no, it's a very powerful workshop. And you can do it for yourself, or you can be guided by somebody like you guys used to do. One of the things that I've seen is, it comes back to this whole, that sort of change management, sort of training and adoption piece.
Yep.
As we've, over the last sort of 7 years, as HubSpot sort of has gone further and further into the mid-market, as they call upmarket, working with bigger and bigger clients, this has become much more apparent, especially now that the technology that we're implementing is touching the entire business, right? Which is also, again, one of the data points there is that the CFO now is involved in so many of the conversations, whereas we never spoke to a CFO,
right.
Until 6 or 7 years ago.
Yeah.
But one of the biggest reasons, and I think a lot of people listening probably know this, but for those who don't, one of the reasons that any technology, whether it's a CRM or a marketing tool or AI, fails is because there wasn't clear communication and training and what the benefits would be for the people actually using these tools on a daily basis, right?
So true.
Yeah. So it seems like change management, or whatever you want to call it, essentially the training component of why people are using these tools. And before you get to the how and the what, it's having them understand why they're using these tools. It just seems like change management is far more under the spotlight now than it ever was, at least from our perspective.
I think it's never been more important. And I think it's also where some of the frustration comes from among people trying to get, say, trainers or coaches or consultants to help with AI stuff, is because there's a lot of new people in the market that are trying to sell you something flashy, and they might be really cool, but they think that AI solves everything. And it's like, it can solve a lot of things, but there's this whole historical change management component that hasn't really changed, that if you've done any of this kind of digital transformation stuff for any length of time with any technology, you're like, well, what's old is new again, because that is a huge piece that a lot of these people think they can just come in and say, well, let's slap AI on it. And it's like, well, I think you're probably going to have a bit more of an uphill battle than you anticipate.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's unfortunately, that kind of noise is never good, for anything that's valuable.
Yeah.
In fact, this came up in a team meeting we had yesterday. I think it was called Builder.ai or.
Yeah.
Which, when you look at it, the whole premise was like, oh yeah, this will help you build your own AI.
Right.
And it turns out there was like zero AI in the product.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I feel like that's been happening since we started Marketing AI Institute, is that part of the reason we even started publishing stuff was we were just trying to figure out the technology landscape, because we just didn't know what was legit, what actually was AI, what was being called AI. And I think that, at least today you can tell if something is like generative AI, sure. But beyond that, the worst place you see this right now, I think, is AI agents. It's like everything is an agent. It's like, okay, sure. But that used to be called a workflow or an automation, right?
Yes.
And it's like, we could call it whatever we want. I get it. But it's extremely convoluted. And in a lot of times too, the hardest part is a lot of it's not exactly malicious. It's like, you might have sales reps that, again, this is why AI literacy is critical. Like, your sales reps at an AI company, you would assume know a lot about AI, and they don't, like, a lot of times. And that's okay, but we have to accept that they might need a little education on what the solution actually does and what it doesn't and how it's different we're not different from what's out there.
Right. Which comes back to the whole training and
Yes.
communication piece. Yeah. Education. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. Naming is such an overlooked thing, because when you start using the same name for 100 different things, it's not a surprise that eventually it becomes confusing, that people really don't know what you're talking about, right?
For sure. I'm biased. I'm a writer by trade. So I think if you're indiscriminate with your language, it's easy to get indiscriminate with your thinking.
Yes, that's a really good point. I love that. So, Mike, as we wrap up here, what sort of final words of advice? I know this is moving so fast, and you know this better than everybody, pretty much, because of where you're at the cold face. What advice do you have for folks here? Summer 2025. If I have you back here in the fall, it'll be a different answer, but maybe. What advice do you have in closing?
I would say if you have not yet begun to act with urgency towards AI, it is now the time to start. I don't want to say people are behind, because I don't really think that many people are that far behind. And I think even if you are, you can catch up really quickly if you do some of the right, like a select few right things. But I would say if you have kept punting this a bit and saying, well, I'm going to find the time next quarter, or we're going to really get on it next quarter or next month, or whatever, you need to step back and rethink what's happening. Like, I don't care what it is that you do in a day. Every day has to be moving the ball forward a little bit. I'm not even saying it even has to be using AI more. Even if all you can do in a day is document another workflow as you're doing it, or like even that is going to end up benefiting you to becoming much more of an AI forward professional, even if you don't touch Chat GPT in a given day. If you're still, whatever you can be doing to move that ball forward every single day, I think that's critical, because it's just like, we all say this, like, you're not going to find the time. You're not going to say, you have to just make it. And it sucks. Like, I get it. Nobody wants to hear that. I'm not saying you got to carve out 3 hours every night to do it. I'm saying figure out how to turn what you're already doing and you already have to do into an opportunity to either use AI more, or put the infrastructure in place so that when you do have a moment to breathe and you can think more deeply about a workflow and how it could be AI forward, that you actually have the infrastructure ready to do that. Like that process, a series of steps, a checklist, even the most basic stuff, just inch by inch, move it forward.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. I mean, if you think about it, if you just do one thing a day, in a year from now, that's 365 things that you've done that are getting you closer and keeping 100%. You ahead. And it kind of reminds me of another scary statistic, which I'm sure you talk about a lot, where they say 100% of leaders know that AI is a massive opportunity and will have an impact on their business one way or the other. Yet only 5% of them are actually doing something about it, right? So I think, to your point, if you're not doing anything yet, you're one out of every 20 people who's in the same boat. So just take that one additional step, and suddenly you're ahead of 18 other people.
And I'd also say, too, it's hard to get in this mindset sometimes. It's very hard for me, but don't overthink it, because I realize there's 1,000,001 considerations, concerns, and things are happening so fast. I can't guarantee any of us are going to be able to stay ahead of it. But if you are feeling really overwhelmed, or if you're just like paralyzed at where to start, focus on your own role to begin with. Like, I even have to tell myself this, like, I don't need to know every single possible thing going on in AI, though, even like that's increasingly part of my job.
Yes.
I sometimes, when I get overwhelmed, say, okay, we're going to take a breath. We're going to focus on AI for content today, because that's what I'm working on, even though my remit of using AI goes far beyond that these days. But I say, okay, we're going to do, or even within that, it's going to be AI for subject lines today. It's going to be AI for plot, or whatever it is.
Absolutely.
Focus on how it can be applied to your own role. That will get you really, really far, even if it doesn't feel like you did a ton in a given day.
Yeah. I think that's really good advice. It's that, everybody look at your own situation and say, like, what is one thing that, like, I feel I'm having to repeat, every day or every week or every month, that I could maybe change with AI, and just start with that one thing. And once you've got that done, then ask the question again, and I think that's really good advice. Mike, Thanks again so much for being on the show. I look forward to chatting again soon, and I will continue to learn from you virtually through all the great content that you guys are putting out.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. It's been a really great chat.
Take care, Mike.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to RevOps Champions. If today's episode gave you a new idea for scaling smarter or helped you see your team, processes, or tech in a new light, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next insight. And if it hit home, share it with a colleague. Let's grow this community for forward-thinking leaders together.